Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be doing my November bullet journal setup. Let's get started with the cover page. I'm starting by using a brush pen to write the bubble letters of November. The theme for this month is bread. I absolutely love bread, so I'm super excited to do this theme. The brush pen will create bold dark letters which will make it stand out. It's faster than a regular pen. Okay, now for the fun part. I'm going to draw all different types of bread all over the page. I decided to use a brown marker for the outline instead of a black pen like I usually do. This is something different, but I think that using different colors of line art can make it look more interesting and match the colors better. I wanted to go with a soft, warm, cozy look for this setup. I think that using brown will make it look warmer and softer. I'm drawing all kinds of bread such as cornets, loaves, buns, baguettes, croissants, and more. I used the same brown color to outline each bread drawing. If you don't already know, a bullet journal is an organization system that you can customize to your own needs. I like to be artistic in my bullet journal, which is why I'm drawing lots of breads. I bought a pack of markers that came with a blending palette, but if you don't have that, you can just use the plastic packaging that the marker came in. I'm scribbling the marker ink on the plastic and using the colorless blender to pick up the color. This will create a new shade. I only used 4 to 5 markers to color this entire setup, so I didn't have a lot of variety. By mixing the colors, I can make new shades out of the markers that I already have. I'm basically only using bread colors like brown, tan, and orange. These are all warm colors to match the cozy theme. Coloring the breads was very fun. I did a lot of blending and mixing the colors together to create shades for the shadows. Using brush markers were very helpful for coloring because it can create a smoother blend between the two colors. I also left highlights and used some color pencil for depth and contrast. This was a different style of drawing than I usually do. I put a lot more work into coloring because I wanted the food to look delicious and appetizing, like it was freshly baked out of a bakery. As you can see, I used the colorless blender and the blending palette a lot. I used it to line out the colors that I already had. The colorless blender makes a lighter color of the ink that it picks up, so it's useful when coloring in the white part of the bread. I don't want it to look too flat, but I also don't want it to look too detailed because I need to draw these breads repeatedly throughout my setup, so I don't want it to take too long. This is the perfect combination of a simple cartoon style and a semi-realistic style. I really like coloring in the bread because it was really fun to see what I could do with a limited color palette. I had a lot of fun with the blending. After I was done with the main color, I made sure to go back and add darker colors and details. I used a darker brown to add shading on the bread. To finish up the page, I'm going to add some drop shadows to all the bread so it won't look too flat. I'm using a warm tan color instead of gray because I wanted to contribute to the warm color scheme. After that, I'm just adding some little highlights to the bakery to make it seem more delicious. I used a white gel pen for this. After erasing the pencil marks, the delicious cover page is done. Next, I'll be doing the calendar page. I'm drawing a box for the calendar which I'll split up into 30 boxes for each day of November. I'm using a ruler to create straight lines and boxes. For this setup, I want to go with a clean look, so I'm going to draw straight lines instead of doodly lines. On the side, I'm using a brown marker to outline the note section. I drew the bread scores only on the bottom half because I want to leave the top half as room for me to write it. Now I'm going to draw lots of bread around the calendar to fill in the space and add some colors. I'm using the same brown marker for the outline. I cut off the part of the bread that was touching the calendar to make it seem like the bread was going to be behind it. Now I'm just coloring the bread just like the cover page. I used 4 colors of markers and added some shading and highlights. I started with the shadows this time instead of the base color. I made sure to make each one a different type of bread. The last step is to add the drop shadow to all of the breads. At the top of the calendar, I'm writing November in a rounded text font. First, I outline the letters. Since the letters are smaller than the cover page, I decided to use a regular pen instead of a brush pen. Now I'll just fill it in. I have this brown chalk pastel that I'll use to color in the baguette in the note section. Since the baguette is such a large area to cover in, I didn't want to use markers because it might become streaky. Unlike markers, chalk pastel creates a very smooth surface. I know that some people don't like the smeariness of the chalk, but I have some tips that will prevent the smearing. Tip 1. Don't color in an even layout of color at first. Only brush over lightly and leave the white spots showing through. This will make sure that there isn't a bunch of excess chalk powder on top. We will blend it later on to create a smooth surface. Tip 2. Use a tissue to wipe off the excess chalk. Wiping off the excess chalk will prevent it from smearing and it pretty much gets rid of all the loose powder on the paper. Lastly, I'm just erasing the chalk that went out of the border. Now I'll continue with the calendar. I'm just writing dates in the corner from 1 to 30. I realized that I put 31 days instead of 30, so make sure you don't do the same. To add some more color, I'm using 2 colors of markers to highlight the top bar of the boxes. I alternated yellow, orange, and a brown color. This is my first time trying this style of coloring, but I like this one a lot better than just coloring a circle around the date because it adds more color. At the bottom, I'm coloring in the days that aren't part of November. Now it's time for the quote at the bottom. I wrote, "Life without bread is pain." I know it might not make sense, so let me explain it. Pain means bread in French, but it's spelled like pain in English, so it's kind of like a pun that means bread. But in this context, it's pain. It's kind of a bad pun. I just couldn't find the right bread quote online, so I just made one up. Anyways, I used a brush pen for the first 2 words, then I used a regular pen for the rest. Now I'm using some black paper to create the heading for the days of the week. I folded a strip of paper down and cut it out. Then I'm gluing down the strip of paper as the header. On the top, I'm using a white gel pen to write the days of the week. And here's the finished calendar page. Next is the test tracker. This is a page for students. It's where I can keep track of my upcoming tests and see all of the information in one spot, like when I need to start studying, when it's due, and things like that. Right now, I'm using the brown marker to draw a table where I write the information on. Each row is a spot for a test, and the columns are spots for each category. My plan is to make it look kind of like a bakery shelf, with the shelves being the rows where I write my information. I'll be writing on the shelves and on the space above it. I just colored in every other space with a dark brown. I accidentally messed up on the first space because I colored it in when it was supposed to be empty. I decided to use a light brown chalk pastel to fill in the spaces above the shelf. I put a thin layer of chalk in each white space and blended it out with my finger. After that, I just wiped off the excess with a tissue. To make the shelf look even more defined, I'm using this brown colored pencil to outline the bottom and make it look darker. This really helped the shelves pop out more and it made it look like an actual shelf. I have this paint sample that I got from the store. I'm going to cut a strip for the header of the table. I just glued it on the top of the page with a glue stick. This will be the part where I'll write what each column represents. I'm using a white gel pen to write the titles for each column. The first and last columns actually go off the shelf into the white space. At the top, I'm gluing down a piece of black construction paper for the title of the page. I'm writing test tracker at the top in all capital letters. I wrote it in a font that looks like the chalkboard signs in the bakery. On the left side each letter, I made another line and filled it in with little strokes. And now for the last step. I'm coloring in the bread at the bottom. This time I went for a more simple coloring style with only 2 colors for each bread. The breads are so small that it doesn't really need that much coloring or details. I also use orangey colors instead of brown colors because the shelf is already brown, so I want the bread to stand out instead of blending in with the shelf. And here's the finished test tracker page. This next page is my YouTube video plans / brain dump. This is where I'll write all my ideas and plans for future videos. I'm using a ruler and a black pen to draw a rectangle for the space where I'll write my ideas in. I'm trying to create a recipe card that kind of looks like a recipe for bread. I'm drawing a light brown marker border inside of the rectangle to add some color. Now I'm writing the title on top using a brown marker. This is going to be kind of like the title of the recipe. It kind of reminds me of my October brain dump page where I made a potion recipe page. Below that I wrote the serving size to make it look like a real recipe card. Now I'm drawing a bread loaf. I colored it very simply with only 2 colors. Now I'm writing ingredients. When I write my ideas below it, it will seem like the notes are the ingredients or instructions for this recipe. The decorations took up almost half of the page, but it's okay because I don't write a lot on this page. To finish it off, I'm adding some grid washi tape which will fill in the empty space. And now it's done. Next is the habit tracker. This is where I'll track how often I do my habits each day and see which ones I need to do more often. A similar concept to the test tracker, I'm drawing some shelves as the rows for the trackers. Now I'm drawing 2 breads on top of each shelf. The habit tracker is going to be inside the bread. Now I'm going to use my black pen to draw the mini calendar inside each bread. I drew a grid with 5 rows and 7 days to create 30 boxes for each day of November. I'll show you how to use this later on. I wanted to keep the clean look that I've been using throughout my setup, so I made the lines as straight as I could, and I didn't make it curvy. I made a total of 8 boxes for each habit. Now I'm going to make the sign beneath each bread with a black brush pen. I'm drawing a small rectangle under the shelf. This is going to be the label that tells me what my habit is. I want it to look like a bakery, like the black chalkboard signs that I use to label each type of bread. Now I'm coloring in the bread. I avoided the calendar because I wanted to leave it blank for me to color it in when I'm tracking my habits. I'm coloring in a large area, so I was afraid it might look streaky. Luckily, it turned out okay, and I think it's because I went over each spot with an even layer of color multiple times, which created a darker and more saturated color. If I just did a single stroke in separate parts like I did for the test tracker, then it would have been much more streaky. Now I'm creating a lighter brown by using the colorless blender to pick up the ink and using it to color the white part of the bread loaf. I also used some chalk pastel to color in the bread because I wanted a variety of brown shades, but I had a limited color of markers. If you have more colors of markers, you can use that instead. I'm just cleaning up the edges of where the brown chalk is. Now I'll finish up coloring the breads by adding a darker brown shadow and some shading. The next step is to write on the label. I'm using a white gel pen to write each habit on top of the black rectangle. The habit corresponds to the bread above it. After that, I'm gluing a piece of black paper for the heading on top. This is going to be just like before, where I made a heading to look like a chalkboard sign. I used a white gel pen to write habit tracker in the same font as the test tracker. After I was done, I was not happy with how it turned out, so I decided to cover up the word habit with some more black paper. I think the letters were too close to each other with no space in between, so I wanted to redo the first word and make it look more spaced apart. This time I didn't use the fancy font, I just wrote it as a simple capital letter font. Now I'll show you how to use this habit tracker. Each day I'll color in the box if I did the habit that day. My goal is to get all of the boxes filled. And that's it for the habit tracker. Moving on to the mood tracker. This page is where I'll track my mood levels and see how happy or sad I am at different times of the month. I'm going to make a bar graph, so on the y-axis we have the moods from happiest to angriest. On the x-axis I wrote the dates from 1 to 30. Now I'm going to make the bars of the bar graphs that I'll color in. I'm drawing 30 baguettes for each day of November. I will color in these baguettes like bars on the bar graph. I'll show you how to use this later. I like to use graphs as mood tracker instead of color-coded ones because it's easier for me to see which mood is higher or lower. I messed up on one of the baguettes, so I'm gluing down a piece of paper to cover it. On each baguette I made several score lines. I just drew a thin oval shape. I made the score lines of each baguette in different spots. To add some variation, I also drew some baguettes with score lines going off to the side, so that it will look like the baguette is slightly turned. At the top, I'm drawing different types of bread like croissants, rolls, buns, and a slice of bread. I drew the outline with a brown marker instead of the pen that I used for the baguettes. Now I'm just coloring them in. At the bottom of each bread, I drew a tan drop shadow. Now I'm going to make the same chalkboard sign as before. I glued down a piece of black paper and I'm writing mood tracker on top in white. Since this page has so many things going on, I don't want to make it too detailed by using a fancy font, so I just wrote it in capital letters. Now I'll show you how to use the mood tracker. Each day I'll color in the baguette at the height that my mood is at. Today I'm happy, so I'll color it to the top. After the end, I'll see my high and low points of the mood by looking at how much of the baguette is colored in. That's a lot of bread. Moving on to the weekly spread. I'm creating a simple planner layout where I'll write all my tasks and to-do lists for each day. I'm drawing 5 horizontal rows for each weekday. This is a layout on one page. I made a small gap in between each box. I'm making this as a student planner, so I want to separate each day by subject. I drew 5 lines to separate each day into boxes for my subjects. At the top, I glued down a strip of black paper for the heading. I'm writing the subjects for each of the columns that it corresponds to. On the left side of each box, I'm writing the days of the weeks and the dates. At the bottom, there's my weekend boxes. The weekly task boxes will write all the things that I need to complete throughout the week. I'm going to make the weekend boxes into breads. I chose bread shapes that have open spots for me to write in. I usually have less tasks on the weekend, so that's why it's smaller than the other boxes. To color it in, I colored it in one stroke instead of going over it many times, because I needed it to be light enough for me to write in. The more times you go over the marker, the darker the color will be. One layer of the marker ink creates a lighter shade. The other bread was lighter color, so I didn't need to do the same. I'll finish this page off by highlighting each day of the week with a tan marker. Now it's time for the final flip through. I love this setup a lot and I had a lot of fun making it. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time.